It's that time again. Time to enter the forbidding world of the supernatural. And tonight, I want to tell you about a bizarre haunting which happened to a friend of mine who's a taxi driver. I admit that it sounds a bit like the scenario for a Hollywood horror film. In fact, a similar film has been made in recent times. But I can assure you that what I'm about to tell you actually happened. It all began some 5 or 6 years ago, and it concerns a perfectly ordinary car which my friend bought at a second-hand car showrooms. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a comfortable family car. It had been previously owned by, as they say, one careful lady driver. It was in exceptional condition for the year and had done only a few thousand miles since new. The price was a bit over the odds, but my friend thought that it was a small premium to pay for such a nice motor. There was no indication that this car would soon change his life forever. Anyway, one Thursday morning in March 1985, he went to the garage to take possession of the car. There it was, out on the forecourt, shining like a new pin. He quickly completed the paperwork and drove it home. And then he went to the licensing authorities to get it tested, and very soon he was able to attach his Hackney carriage plate to the bumper. Everything was fine for a few weeks, and like all good taxi drivers, he cleaned and serviced his car regularly. Business was good, and so my friend decided to make full use of the car by taking on a night driver. He found one without too much difficulty and set him on. But after only 5 days, the driver phoned him up one evening and said that he wasn't coming in that night. In fact, he wasn't coming in ever again. When my friend asked him why he'd reached this decision, he was met with a hoot of derisive laughter and the comment, "As if you didn't know." Before he could ask for an explanation for the strange comment, the man had rung off. Mystified, but more annoyed that a valuable source of extra income had been cut off, my friend set about finding another night driver. Again, he found one easily enough, and again, the man quit after only a week on the job. This was getting too much for my friend. He thought that he was helping unemployed people to earn a decent living, and he couldn't understand what it was that was making them leave after a few days. The next day, he went into the taxi office to ask if anybody knew of someone who might like to drive for him at night. But he was met with a wall of silence. Thinking he was the butt of a practical joke or something, he asked his mates what they were playing at. Nobody answered for a few moments, and then one guy said that nobody wanted the job of driving a haunted cab. My friend laughed as he didn't believe in ghosts, and he could think of nothing sillier than the thought of a haunted taxi. He asked them what they meant, but no one would explain. They only enigmatically said that he'd better take the cab out one night and find out for himself if he really didn't know the answer to his question. So, the next day he started work in the afternoon and carried on into the night. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. In fact, he had quite a good night. And by 2 in the morning, he'd earned more than he would have got during the day. So he decided to alter his working patterns and give night driving a go for himself. After a good sleep, he again went out the following afternoon and worked well into the wee small hours. At about 1:30, he stopped at a garage to get some petrol and have a chat with the cashier, who was a friend of his. He then returned to his car and drove off. Just as he was pulling away from the garage, though, he suddenly smelt a horrible stink. It was as if someone had put some rotten fish or meat on the back seat. He pulled into the side of the road and looked into the back of the cab, but there was nothing there. He got out and opened the back door to see if there was anything under the seats, but again, he found nothing. Mystified and a little annoyed that his cab was smelling so badly that he'd not be able to pick up any fares until the smell was cleared, he pulled away from the curb to go home and sort out the problem. And then, as he checked in his rear-view mirror to see if it was safe to pull out into the outside lane, he saw a movement in the back. It wasn't clear, but it looked as if someone was sitting upright on the back seat, staring at him. He was taken by surprise and quickly looked round, but there was no one there, of course. He looked in the rear-view mirror again, and sure enough, there was a figure sitting in the back seat. It was a bit clearer this time, and he was able to make out the definite shape of what looked like an old woman dressed in a dark coat. He stopped the cab quickly and turned to demand what the woman was doing in his cab. But the back seat was empty. There was no one there. Once again, he looked in his mirror, and there was the woman again. Only this time, he could see her quite clearly, and what he saw filled him with terror. The woman was bathed in a sort of unearthly blue light, which, he noticed, didn't seem to cast any shadows. She was about 60 years old, and was indeed dressed in a dark coat, buttoned to the neck. She looked as if she was soaking wet. He could actually see drops of water glistening on her shoulders and falling from her lank hair. She was wearing a pair of old-fashioned pince-nez glasses. But what was the most frightening thing was that her face was bloated and discolored, and where her eyes should have been were two black holes oozing a dark, slimy substance. This was too much for my friend. He now knew why he couldn't get any night drivers, and he also knew that he would never scoff at ghosts again. But fear is a terrible thing, because there was no way that he could stay in the cab a moment longer. He got out as quickly as he could, locked the cab, and went in search of a bus or some other form of transport to get him home. Before he left his cab, he couldn't resist one more look at the back seat. And sure enough, there was the old lady sitting impassively, staring straight ahead. The next day, which happened to be a Saturday, my friend rang me and asked me if I would come over and pick him up, as his cab had broken down the night before and he wanted to pick it up. As I wasn't doing anything in particular, I agreed. Immediately I saw him, I sensed that something was wrong, but I decided to wait until he told me what was bothering him. And I soon found out. Because when he got to his cab, he seemed very reluctant to open it. So I asked him straight out, and he blurted the story of his experience to me. As he knew I was interested in such things, he didn't hold anything back, safe in the knowledge that I would not laugh at him or think him mad. Naturally, I offered to go out with him one night to see if the manifestation happened again. And after a bit of persuasion, he agreed. So the next few nights, we both went out in his cab. 3 nights later, I experienced what my friend and both his night drivers had experienced. Although I knew that what I was seeing couldn't hurt me, nevertheless, it was rather unpleasant. But it did give me a clue which helped me in my research into this strange phenomenon. And it wasn't difficult to find out who the ghost was. I contacted the previous owner of the car, or at least the husband of the previous owner, and he told me that the car had belonged to his wife. But one night, she'd been coming home from her daughter's house and had failed to arrive. 2 hours after she should have arrived, her husband had phoned the police, anxious that she might have had a crash. They traced the route she would have taken, but found no sign of a crash or anything else. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later that police divers found her car in a local reservoir. Sitting in the back seat was his wife, dead. It looked as if she'd had a puncture and skidded off the road. She drowned when water had flooded the interior of the car, and she couldn't get out as the doors were damaged and stuck. She'd probably crawled into the back seat to breathe in a pocket of air or something. There were no suspicious circumstances. I asked the man if he had a photo of his wife, and when I saw it, I immediately recognized the woman that we had seen in the back seat of the cab. She was about 60 years old and was wearing the coat that she had worn when she had crashed. It was made from a dark material and was buttoned to the neck. and she was wearing a pair of old-fashioned pince-nez glasses. So, if you ever have cause to use a taxicab, and you see the driver nervously looking in the rear-view mirror from time to time, beware. You might end up paying for an extra passenger.